checker.
We will return to your scheduled programming shortly, or we are currently experiencing technical difficulties.
Pulling a bird of prey first thing in the morning. I tell you, well, it's not even first thing in the morning. I've been up for a little while. Sorry about that, guys. My bad, my bad. Let me start over here. Um, Michael J. Crawford, good to see you. Yes, Rational Roundtable, not anti-checker on this channel. And I was saying, Schromer, there is no space in Rational Roundtable. It's one word, so it doesn't highlight unless you put it in as a single word. I know that's just the way YouTube is. It's very picky. Sorry about pulling a bird of prey there. If I was on my other set, you would see a red turd. I'm hurting pretty bad today. Although it's not actually the knee, it's my back, which it's funny because the whole thing with the knee started with my back, and now it's kind of going full circle where my back is doing horribly because I can't walk straight and I have to use a cane all the time and the walker and stuff, and it's just I'm having a very, very bad back day right now. Anyway, let's get right into the chat, guys. I don't want to just complain. Yosef was first, although he was first a couple of hours ago. I don't know if you're still here, Yosef. If you are, thank you. So having 5 likes on a stream that might not even be. Your fans are true believers. Yeah, that's actually really mind-blowing. I saw that there were 5 likes on the stream when I sat down, and you put that in 2 hours ago. So I was like, holy crap. I'm sorry I'm late, guys, but honestly, I struggled getting out of bed today. I mean, physically struggled to get out of bed because of my back. John DeMarco was first after I started the stream, says hi. 47 York Tone says hello, sir. Hope you're well. Aside from various body parts being non-functional or broken, I'm okay. Schromer says greetings, anti-checker. I mean Rational Roundtable and fellow nerds. I mean far-right conservatives. And that's what, yeah, you guys know now. I know some of you guys would be considered far-right conservative. Some of you guys would be considered far-left liberal. Some of you are more or less moderate. I myself hold the position of a classical liberal, which in the modern day terms, the closest thing to it would be a libertarian. But I'm not truly an ideologue when it comes to politics. While I am a federal minimalist, I think that if the government doesn't have a compelling reason to do something, it should not do it. I am also a federal pragmatist in that if you're going to do something, you go for it and you make it work. You don't hold back just because you want things to be as small as possible. So, for example, if you're going to do if you're going to do federal health care, then do it right. Don't do a half-ass measure like the Affordable Care Act that just makes it more difficult for people. I have spent out of pocket in the last 9 months pushing $40,000 because of the Affordable Care Act, because it's so affordable. Bird of Prey says, Kapla. Hey, Bird. Not Ryan John says hello out there in YouTube land. Hey, Luke says, hey, guys and gals. Or actually, he says, ho, 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 hey, guys and gals. Luke, how's my favorite Frenchman? Schromer says, considering that I'm economically left-wing social conservative, what on earth do I call yourself? Well, there you go. You're an economically left-wing social conservative. Nothing wrong with that. And there's a few things talking about the sound that I forgot to turn on. Luke says, I can't tip you when you are mute. Well, I'm not mute now, so you can tip me now. And I believe the link is in the description. However, you know, obviously, while I am a greedy bastard, you don't have to. Peter says, if people were worried about that, if people were worried that I had gone. I've had a chest infection. That sucks. Yeah, I was wondering about you, Peter. I'm glad to see you back. But I know sometimes, you know, it's funny because I have to, it can be difficult. And I know it's one of those, oh, you poor guy, but it can be difficult from my perspective when, like right now we only have 12 people because the Rational Roundtable channel is pretty small. And really the only people that are probably subscribed to it are the ones that want to talk about the stuff that I won't talk about on the other channel. The But when things get crazy, like lately, my live streams have hit numbers like 70, 80, even 100, and when it gets like that, it can be hard to keep track of everybody. So that's why. But I'm glad that uh, those of you that have been with me for a long time are still around, and I do. And please don't ever think that I take you for granted. Um, Luke says, I have reacted to your video so far, giving feedback my own atheist experience. If you are curious, see your comment sections. Excellent, Luke. I haven't had a lot of time to look at them, but I will. I'm curious about it. And you know what, Luke? That's the thing is, and I'm sure you know this by now. I love my atheist friends, and I love the fact that atheists are what make me a better Christian. I'm just being completely honest with that. I was a horrible Christian before I started fighting atheists. The atheists have made me a much better person. Mark Andy says, it's the circle of pain and it screws us all. The circle of pain. Is that an actual song or is that just you throwing musical notes on life? Peter says, hope you're well, not too sore. I hope I am very sore today, but I got a lot to do, so I can't let it bother me too much. I'm going to, after the live stream, I've got a ton of work to do. Because I might, and I don't know, because I'm still fighting the bureaucracies on this. Even though I'm nowhere near healed or anything and not really functional, I may have to go back to work in like 2 days. Which, if that happens, that's going to really suck. But it's just because I've been fighting with the insurance company. They didn't approve my official leave, and so now I've got my surgeon filling out paperwork for my employer to try and say, no, he needs to be off work, but we'll see what happens. Valor says, I know this might dampen the mood a bit and selfish of me. Could I ask you to say a prayer for my ex's grandfather? Mr. Brooks died earlier this morning. Oh, man, Valor, I am truly, truly sorry about that. And I'll tell you, because I know you can't see it, but on my prayer list, I've had your ex and your ex's grandfather, but I will alter that so because I don't know how you feel about it, Valor, but for me personally, I don't generally pray for the dead. I pray for the family of the dead to get through the mourning process as quickly and painlessly as possible. Let me change my notes here. Or died. Um, and by the way, I also Valor, and I know that some of you think, because I know I have some atheists here, forgive the church-ese stuff that we're talking about right now, but we have a wonderful prayer group at our church that that I've been sending this stuff to. So, but I am truly saddened that Mr. Brooks has passed, and I hope that your ex has a relatively quick recovery from that. I mean, and I know, like, losing a grandparent is not as difficult as, say, losing a parent, but it can still be, depending on how close you were to them, it hurts. So, yeah. Peter says, I'm a moderate, middle of the road socialist. That is not communist. That is true, but that is fairly far left from on the overall scale. Being a socialist is, of course, left of being a, say, liberal capitalist, and then a centrist capitalist, a conservative capitalist, and then you get into things like laissez-faire capitalism and stuff like that. Peter says, I've been in a bit of rough past day or so around tail, but feeling much better. I'm glad to hear that, Peter. And I know, it seems like this year has been rough for a few of us. And so obviously I've been complaining a lot, and I shouldn't, because I've got a lot to be thankful for. But the physical discomfort is just so aggravating that I've been in a piss poor mood for the majority of the year, and I am ready for that to be done. Mr. Miles says, Peter, I consider myself a socialist light as well, but American brand socialism such as Social Security. I don't, and Mr. Miles, I'll say this. I don't think that advocating for Social Security makes you a socialist, because I believe in Social Security. I think it should be handled very differently, but I do believe that we should have a form of Social Security. I also believe that the federal government should be, in fact, running the schools, which a lot of people think that's a horrible idea. I disagree with them. And I am open to universal health care, but just not this half-assed measure of the Affordable Health Care Act. I think that has done a lot more damage than good. He lies, Luke. He doesn't love us at all. Shh, don't give it away. John says, I appreciate the faith versus belief video. Thank you, John. That was definitely from the heart. And it's something that bugs me that people confuse the terms, but also, and it was neat being able to spend some time with Josh Brooker, the pastor that I was talking about in that video. Just made me think about that a lot. And I couldn't sleep, and I decided, even though like last night, what happens sometimes, like I'll wake up because of the pain, and then either I can get back to sleep or I can't. And last night I think because the 2 nights before, I'm not even exaggerating, on both Thursday and Friday night, I got less than 2 hours of sleep for the entire night. So last night, even though I did wake up a few times from the pain, I managed to get right back to sleep. But I've decided that from now on, if I wake up and I can't get back to sleep, that's the time, and I think the best time, to record stuff for the Rational Roundtable channel. Not Ryan John says, never got to tell you how much I enjoyed the faith versus belief video. Very well done. Also helped me out of a foul mood that happened to be in the time. Well, excellent. And if you know what, and if that's the thing, if you in fact, and I say this about almost any of my videos, if they lift your spirits in some way, then that's my ultimate goal. With the Rational Roundtable channel, I only have it. You're not going to see uber beautifully produced videos like the stuff that Mr. Miles puts together for me on the other channel. You're not going to see that kind of stuff on the Rational Roundtable channel. You're just going to see me talking about various things, whatever's on my mind, politically, religiously, stuff like that. And it's a springboard for ideas. And if you enjoy it and you see something and you like it, that's all I want is to. But obviously the production stuff goes to Anti-Trigger. Mark says it was to the tune of the Lion King Circle of Life. Ah, okay, gotcha. Circle of Pain, Circle of Life. I'm old, but I finally figured it out. Luke says, damn it, I missed your answer while I was trying to figure out how Streamlabs works. That's all right, Luke. So basically, which answer? The answer to you not being able to... Oh, as far as your atheist stuff, I just said that I love I will definitely go back and look at what you put, and I'm looking forward to it, because I love talking to atheists about this stuff. As long as people don't become jerks about it, I love the conversation. But the problem is when I say jerks, I don't mean argumentative. I expect you to be argumentative, in that I expect, if you have a theist and an atheist hashing out, hey, does God exist? I don't expect them to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I expect them to fight about it. But I don't expect derogatory language. I don't expect rudeness. I don't expect mockery. And when people do that, that's when I draw the line. And I say, look, if you want to have a conversation, great. If you want to sit there and insult people, have a nice day, because that's not my bag. Mr. Miles says, you're, in my view, better than the book you hold in reverence. You won't send me to hell by your standards, but you believe in a God that will send me to hell for being an atheist. Well, I think that's a misunderstanding there, Miles. And first of all, I appreciate the compliment, but I think you're wrong. But thank you. But as far as the standard of going to heaven or going to hell, there's a lot of confusion about that. People, the people get this idea that there's if you haven't seen the show The Good Place, that's what people think theology really is. If you have, and The Good Place is actually a hilarious show. It's theologically horrible, but it's a hilarious show about the afterlife. And basically the concept there is that everything you do, you score points. And if your point total is high enough, you get to go to the good place. If it's not high enough, you go to the bad place. And which of course is their version of heaven and hell. And God doesn't grade on a point scale. And people understand scripture after scripture after scripture, like when the Bible says, oh, there's no place in heaven for thieves or adulterers or whatever. It's not saying that if you've stolen something you're going to hell. It's not saying that if you've had extramarital sex you're going to hell. Because the thing that people miss is the whole point of the 4 primary books of the New Testament known as the Gospels, is that all sin is forgiven. All sin. Not some sin, all sin. There's only one exception, and that exception being blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. That is the lone exception as far as all sin being automatically, patently forgiven. However, there is one thing that you, the person, the human, has to do in order for that to apply, and that is to simply accept it. And that's why I've talked about, like, I've used the analogy of subway tickets. If I'm standing there on the street corner handing out subway tickets to anybody that wants them, right? You want a subway ticket? Here you go, here you go, here you go, here you go. Now, however, you are new to this town, and you say, I haven't seen any subway stations. I don't think there's a subway here. What are you talking about? I don't want your subway ticket. Okay. Have a nice day. But then, when you stumble across a subway station and you want to go on, but you don't have any money because you can't pay it because nobody can pay the $10 million it costs to get on the subway, and you say, oh, I need that free ticket. Tried to give it to you. That's kind of how it works, is that it is an absolute free pass to anybody that wants it. However, and this is where another side of the confusion, because then you have a group of people that think, oh, well, then you can do whatever the hell you want as long as you accept it. Well, there's more to accepting it than just saying, yes, thank you. All right? You have to accept it, not just it with your words, but in here. And that means that you're not going to purposefully and knowingly do things that you ought not be doing. And so there's some confusion there, because there's the acceptance of it, but then there's also the requirement that that acceptance has to be genuine. But it's not about doing things right or doing things wrong, per se. All right, that was a long-winded answer. Sorry, Mr. Miles. Luke says, man, you can talk about your church stuff all you want on a church stream. Well, that's true. But I will only do it on this channel because, obviously, I don't want the Anti-Trekker channel to get shut down. I would like this channel to eventually get monetized, but I absolutely, this channel is not about trying to reach a massive audience. It's trying to reach people that want to talk about this particular topic, and only people that genuinely want to talk about it on whatever side of the fence they're on. And believe me, Luke, I will tell you, I've had more fights with Christians than atheists when doing stuff on this channel in the past, because many Christians hate me. Because I, quite frankly, I will not hold back. And when I hear false teachings, false doctrines, stuff that I got to call BS on, I will call the BS. And so when people get into the whole, the Calvinistic type arguments, that's very, very bad theology in Calvinism. And so I get some Calvinists that get really pissed off at me for that. But the simple fact is, they're wrong. And John Calvin may have been a great guy, but he was wrong. Peter or Valor says, I apologize, I meant for my ex. No problem. I understand that. But some people do pray for the dead. There are some sects in Christianity and other religions that do, in fact, pray for the dead. I don't see any evidence from a biblical perspective that there's any fruit in that. But I do believe in praying for people that are suffering, and the dead are not suffering. Well, U.S. political system is more tight of any. I assume you mean right of anyone else's. What's with that? Or do you mean tight? I don't, Peter. If you mean right, you're right. The United States is actually far more conservative than most other countries, which is interesting. Mr. Miles says, what do you call someone like me who believes in a capitalism and socialist hybrid? I would call you an American, because that's kind of what the United States is a capitalist socialist hybrid. However, I think the fight is over, not on, because honestly, I think that most of us, and I'm sorry for going so slow in the chat, but this is some good stuff. I think that the fight not needs to not be, oh, no socialism, or some of the far left people, none of that capitalism crap. No, capitalism socialist hybrid is what we should be striving for. However, we need to separate where those lines, we need to draw clear lines, what should be considered, like, for example, Social Security, education, stuff like that. Those social programs are absolutely necessary and need to be done 100% by the federal government, right? And I have no problem with that. However, the flip side is also true. Capitalism needs to be capitalism, not fascism. And when I say that, keep in mind that fascism, one of the core tenets of fascism is to control the market. It's funny because part of the reason that Stalin thought Hitler was a right-winger was because there was a quote-unquote free market. A free market that was regulated to the extreme by the government, which is what the United States federal government is doing. They are regulating businesses just to regulate them. And that is dangerous. And I think that, now I understand, let me make this clear. I'm not saying that we should eliminate all business law. I think that a business needs to be held accountable. You can't commit fraud, right? And so if you promise someone a product or a good or service and you don't deliver, you need to be held responsible for that. If you advertise that a product or service will do X and it doesn't do X, you need to be held accountable to that. Okay, that's fraud. And then things like stewardship. You can't pollute. Can't dump toxic waste into the rivers, crap like that, right? Now, outside of that, I don't think the federal government needs, and this is, I know some people don't believe this. This is 100% true. I do not think that the federal government needs to regulate to companies like Comcast what channels come in their basic cable lineup. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think they need to, tell people how to produce their goods and services unless that good and service is a necessity of life. And so, which basically there's very few things that qualifies as. So I don't have a problem with building codes saying that, if you build a house, it has to meet certain standards so that it's a safe house, because housing is a necessity of life. However, if somebody wants to produce a soft drink that is, 3-gallon cans for people to drink, even though it might be disgusting and horrible, they have the right to do it. I think that the idea that the state and bird of prey, all about this, New York banning large drinks, right? What the hell? No, we don't need to regulate everything. So that's kind of where I stand on it. All right, back to the chat because I'm taking way too long. Peter says, no wonder with all the medical paperwork, I'd feel this. Don't even get me started about the medical world right now because of what I've been going through. Mr. Miles says, I don't mind mocking the ideas, but I try to avoid mocking the people. I understand that, Miles, and I disagree on that. I don't think that mocking the idea, it makes for a healthy conversation, because if you mock someone's beliefs, they're not going to want to talk to you about it, right? So if you want to, and I know you put the example in the chat of Noah's Ark, right? Okay, so you think the Ark is silly. Now, I will tell you, like when Robot Chicken did the whole thing with the Cyclopses and the unicorns and stuff, missing the boat for Noah, and then Noah was trying to kill the fairies on the Ark because God doesn't like freaks. That was funny. I laughed at that, right? And I don't mind, good-natured ribbing. But if you're having a serious conversation and you want to make fun of the idea of Noah's Ark, as opposed to make a serious argument as to why you think it's impossible, I don't think you're going to have a fruitful conversation, right? If you want to talk about for example, if the biggest argument against the story of Noah, I would say, is the logistics of a worldwide flood, a flood that actually covered the top of Mount Everest, right? So is that even possible? And so that's where, if I was an atheist and I was taught, or actually even as a Christian, and I'm arguing with someone who is a Genesis literalist, right? A person who believes that everything in Genesis actually happened the way that it's described in the Bible, as opposed to it being a book of parables and lessons. If somebody was taking it all quite literally, then that's where I would argue. I wouldn't sit there and argue about how stupid the ark was, or how do you fit all those animals on an ark or whatever, because they'll come up with some response that makes sense to them that you won't believe. Like people said, "Oh, how do you get all these? How do you feed all these animals and stuff?" And it's like, well, most of the animals were probably babies, so there would be less resources necessary. Those that were egg layers, he would have just had the eggs on the ark rather than the actual animals, stuff like that. But then you get into other logistics, like, okay, so if and by the way, it's not two of every animal, it's two of every unclean animal and seven, I believe, of every clean animal. But let's say, so you have 7 pairs of kangaroos on the ark. How do they get to Australia after the flood? Right? That's a question. And so you get to stuff like that. That's where I would attack it if I was trying to argue on something like that. Generally speaking, I've given up on arguing with people over young Earth creationism because they have their own form of logic that doesn't generally make sense. Aberjam says, no turn alert, how's the knee? Well, the knee hurts, but it's actually, my back is killing me right now. But with this beautiful background, I didn't want to spoil it by putting a turd on the screen. So if I was going to put a turd on the screen, I would put a red turd. Luke says, well, as developed in my comments, we already have a similar definition. The difference is that I add to trust the notion of personification. You identify God as an individual. Right, but that's not, well, but you can trust inanimate objects, or you can trust people. Like, for example, Mr. Miles and I have a level of trust with each other, right? I trust that Mr. Miles will, and I have faith that Mr. Miles is going to produce these videos, like the Borg video he's been working on. Holy crap, is that going to be awesome when it comes. And I know it's taking him time to do it, but I have faith that he is actually needing that time to make the best video he can, as opposed to he just doesn't feel like doing it today. Now, how do I show that level of trust and faith in him? Well, that's the harder thing. I mean, it's like, well, I pay him whenever I get paid from YouTube, regardless of how many videos he puts out, because he deserves it. I also am sending him some stuff, and eventually, as we get all the paperwork and stuff for the business done, he's going to have full access to the channel and stuff once I have all the legalese done for the business side of it, so that he can actually get into the channel, upload videos and stuff. And that's a level of trust that I don't have with a lot of people, right? And I've never even met Mr. Miles face to face. Now, so that's a level of faith that I have in Mr. Miles. I also have faith in this chair that it's going to hold me up. I have faith that the sun's going to rise in the morning and all that crap. But so I think that personification is not necessarily necessary for trust. All right, and just reading the ones addressed to me for a couple of minutes here, because I'm so far behind. Luke says, we also agree on the existence of a faithless Christians. In fact, I'd even argue that there are legions out there. Yeah, I would say that, honestly, and I know this sounds elitist and it comes across as kind of self-righteous, but I'm just trying to be as objective as possible. I think the majority of Christians are not Christians. They are chinos, Christian in name only. They call themselves Christians, but they don't genuinely believe it or trust it, and that's where the faith comes from. They don't trust God. They go to church because that's what they're expected to do. They go to church because that's what they were told to do, but they have no faith in God. They have no trust that the universe, as I said, will unfold as it should. They simply think that this is what you're supposed to do. Mark Andy saying, ooh, dish on Calvinism. Yeah, believe me, I've gotten into it. I had an epic battle online with a guy named 5 Point Baptist over Calvinism. And one thing that he could not answer, man, I wish I had my Bible with me because I'd hold it up, because I actually did a video that said that when we were talking about the idea of free will, which Calvinists do not believe there is such a thing as free will. They believe in predeterminism. They specifically believe that certain people are selected by God in advance before they even exist to go to heaven, and everybody else goes to hell, and that there is nothing in the world that can change that. Right? If you are one of the elect, as they call them, it's called irresistible grace. You cannot. It is not possible for you to do anything that would cause you to go to hell. And by the same token, if you are not one of the elect, there is nothing you could do to get your way into heaven. And so, to which my main response to that was I held up a Bible and I said, then what is the point of this book? If those that are elect are going to heaven, those that are not elect are going to hell, and that's all a done deal, what do we need the Bible for? Heck, what do we need religion for? What is the point of any of this if it's all predetermined? Because I don't need, if I'm one of the elect, I don't need the Bible to tell me what to do. I should already know. And besides that, there's nothing that I could possibly do that would cause me to go to hell anyway. So I don't even need to know, because I'm just naturally going to do whatever it is that I'm supposed to do. And meanwhile, everybody else is a bunch of reprobates, and it doesn't matter. They're not going to get in no matter what they do. So, yeah. Peter says, I do pray in church when I go to church, Rancho. That's mainly at funerals and weddings and christenings. Well, nothing wrong with that, but you know what? You should actually, the bulk of your prayer life should not be at church. You should spend, and this is actually something that's helped me a lot during this difficult time that I've been going through, is spend time alone with God and talk to Him. It feels really, really stupid the first few times you do it, but then you can really get a lot out. It's very therapeutic, in fact. Joseph says, it's interesting to see how Christians fractions fight about who is more correct. I've never seen atheists argue about this. Well, that's because atheism, number one, is not organized in the same way as Christians. There are not atheist sects, right? So you don't have like, oh, I'm a Thunderfoot or a Thunderfootian, right? Oh, I'm a Dawkian, because I follow Richard Dawkins or something. The atheists don't fall into sects like that. They're just, I don't believe in that crap. So it's not the same thing. Now, as far as the Christian factions, the denominations and stuff, that is definitely a problem. And I think that the majority of it is nonsensical. And the majority of it, first of all, a lot of these people fight over things that are ultimately unimportant. Like, for example, is baptism supposed to be being dunked in water or sprinkled with water? Well, if you look at the actual the way that the Bible describes baptism and the words in the Hebrew and Greek that are used, you should be dunked. So that should be the end of that discussion. However, does it ultimately matter? No. Because baptism, the water is not magical. The water doesn't give you superpowers or anything. And baptism is symbolic. And so if you choose to show that symbolism by a sprinkle as opposed to a dunk, fine, whatever. And it's really ultimately not that important. However, then you have some churches that think that baptism is the churches that believe in things like the International Church of Christ is like this. They believe in a doctrine called baptismal regeneration, which means that the water is quite literally magical, and that you are not saved until you are dunked. Which means that if you've suddenly had the epiphany that God is real, and you say, I'm giving my life to Jesus, and I'm going to go to church right now and get baptized, and then you get hit by a car, you're going to hell. I think you're right about Calvinism, but even when we disagree, I'm glad you don't hold back. Thank you, John. And that's the thing. I love to argue, but I also want to be respectful, as respectful as I can with my arguments. Yes, I will attack the ideas, and I will go for the jugular, but not, at least hopefully, and if you guys see me do this, please call me out on this. Not in a mocking way, not in a derogatory way, but in a way, I might say, oh, this is a stupid idea, but then I'm going to follow that up with 17 reasons why it's a stupid idea. I'm not just going to say, you're stupid. Right, which is unfortunately what a lot of people like. Some people, when they talk about Bible literalism, when we get back to Genesis, right, and the 6 day creation story, and people just say, "Oh, that's stupid," and that's their whole argument, right? Atheists, unfortunately, do this way too often. They just say, "I can't believe these idiots think the world was created in 6 days," and that's their whole argument. I understand that from your perspective, that seems absolutely ludicrous, but try to keep in mind that from the perspective of the people you're arguing with, it's not ludicrous. So, in order to show that it is ludicrous, which I agree with you it is, you need to demonstrate why it's ludicrous. And to just sit there and say, you're stupid, that's not an argument. That's telling me that you can't articulate why. Aberjan says, Enter, I've been, and by the way, Aberjan, please remember on this stream, put in at Rational Roundtable, because that's why I didn't see it, because it didn't highlight. Enter, I've been thrown out from churches, both physical and online, for standing firm in Scripture, much like yourself. Lots of glass sheep out there. Yeah, I have never been kicked out of a church, but I have walked out of churches because of fundamental disagreements. And sometimes because of very poor stewardship from pastors. Like I was actually ordained as a deacon and running the entire technical sound ministry for a rather large church in Portland, Oregon. And then, but the church was having financial problems, and the pastor was quite frankly overpaid. And I'm not going to tell you the salaries of everybody, but everybody was equally as ludicrous as the pastor. The senior pastor of the church had a salary of $80,000 a year. Now, based on the size of the church and everything, that in and of itself is not a ridiculous number. It's on the high side, but it's not a ridiculous number if you consider cost of living in Portland, Oregon and stuff. Except that on top of that $80,000 a year, he was getting a housing allowance, which was paying his entire mortgage. He had a cell phone allowance, which paid his entire cell phone bill. He had a transportation allowance, which paid his car payment and his gas and his insurance. Okay? All that on top of the $80,000. So the guy had $80,000 for, oh, and by the way, he also had a food allowance that was basically for like during the day he would meet with people and take them to lunch and stuff. So he got to eat out every single day on the church's dime. And so he had $80,000 to pay for his breakfast, his dinner, his electric bill, and party on. That's it. So the church was struggling financially, and the elders of the church met and they decided, okay. And as a deacon, I was there for this, and I voted for it, which is that, you know what, we have to, you know, the mortgage is falling behind. We're not paying all our bills, so we're going to cut all the salaries of the church in half. So instead, however, benefits will not be touched. So he still gets his housing allowance, his car allowance, his cell phone allowance, all that. But instead of $80,000, he's only going to get $40,000. And the same was true down the line of all the people that were paid by the church. Now, I strongly supported that measure. I didn't like the idea, but at the same time, you've got to be a good steward of what you have. You can't let the church fall apart just because you want the pastor to make a lot of money. And so when that happened, this pastor, and I'm not going to name him because what he did was absolutely despicable, but this pastor, after that happened, stopped answering his phone after 5 o'clock. He stopped going to visit people that were at the hospital and stuff in the middle of the night, which is something that he and I used to do quite frequently. Like he would call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, someone just got checked into the hospital. They're having emergency surgery. Let's go. And I'd get up and we'd get in his car and we'd drive there and we'd spend a few hours with the family and everything, praying with them, for them, and just giving them comfort. I love doing that kind of stuff. And he stopped doing it. And so I was like, what the heck is going on? So I went to his house and I confronted him on it. And I said, look, what is going on? And he said, look, they cut my salary in half. And I said, yeah. And so, well, if they're going to only pay me half my salary, then I'm only working half time. That was the last day I was a member of that church. I walked away from his house. We never went back to his church. I was like, no, you don't take seriously the book that you preach. So no. Because being a pastor is not about making a big salary. Anybody that's in the ministry for money, I have no respect for. But I do understand the reality of the world is that if you're in the ministry full time, you need to make a living. But if that's your primary motivation, then I'm no room for that. Mark Andy says, "Isn't Presbyterian basically all Calvinism, right? Crazy mix up." I don't know. I'm not a Presbyterian. Never been one, so I don't know their doctrines. Valor says, "Mr. Brooks was a Christian and was as kind as they could be. He was also very accepting of our beliefs, even if he didn't agree with it, and never tried to force us to change." Well, that's good. Oh, you're talking about your ex's grandfather. That's good. And I'm truly sorry for your ex's loss. That sucks. Mr. Miles says, "I'm a big fan of a regulation for business, quality control being a big one. Except that here's the thing. If, let's say that I want to produce a shoddy knockoff iPhone, right? And so I make this cell phone that's like, instead of Apple, it's got, a rotting banana on it or something. And it barely works and everything. And so basically an iPhone. But my phone only costs $150 compared to the $1,200 for the new iPhone, right? Now, I don't have a problem with that. Now, if I say, oh, and our phone is just as dependable as the iPhone, then I'm committing fraud. However, if I'm just saying, yeah, you know what? We sell a cheap phone, and it's a cheap phone. I don't have a problem with that. John says he thinks the Presbyterians are Calvinists. I don't know, so no idea. New War of the Worlds on tonight. Oh, very cool. I have not seen War of the Worlds in a long time. I didn't know they made a new one, so that's kind of awesome. And man, I am far behind in the chat, so I'm going to try to go fast for a minute. Luke says, "Wait, you're a proponent of laissez-faire capitalism?" Not necessarily. Partially, yes. I think that the problem is that if you're going to say, you know what, businesses have the right to be businesses, then let them do their thing. Don't regulate them to death. At the same time, things that require regulation, you regulate them well and you enforce those regulations harsh, right? If, for example, you're going to have a regulation that says you can't dump toxic waste into the river and someone does it, you don't go, oh, well, here's your $10,000 fine and you have 6 months to clean it up. No, you shut them down. They are done. Principled uncertainty, anti-religious material I consumed all my life. Any suggestions? Are you saying you want more anti-religious material? In which case, YouTube is full of it. So I'm not sure what you're asking for. Would you agree that cable companies should be regulated to carry local stations? No, I do not believe that. Because what is the government's compelling reason to force cable companies to carry the local stations? Because here's what happens, and I worked in the cable industry for about 8 years, so I do understand how this stuff works. Because here's what happens. As soon as your channel becomes a channel that the cable company is required to carry, and this is something people don't understand, then all of a sudden the cost of that channel goes way up. Because here's how it works. Let's say you pay $100 a month to your cable company. Now people think, oh man, the cable company is getting rich because we got 10 million people that all have cable. They're all paying $100 a month, which means that they're making $1 billion a month. Look at all that money that they have, right? But you're forgetting something. The bulk of that money is not going to Comcast or Cox or whoever your cable provider is. The bulk of the money is going to the channels. So, for example, I don't know what the current rate is, but back when I worked for Comcast, of that $100, like $6 was going to ESPN because they charge $6 per customer to carry their station. Then you pay like another $2 to Nickelodeon and $1.50 to whatever other channel, and this goes on through all the channels. The cable companies have to pay for every single channel that's on there. So what happens is the government says you have to carry this channel. Well, guess what? Now they can charge whatever the hell they want, and the cable company has to pay it, and that's exactly what happens. Because even though there are a lot of channels that really the cable company shouldn't have to pay for it all because they don't get any ratings. So they'd be like, no, we don't want your channel. But the government says we have to have your channel. And you get into fights over it. Plus, cable companies and satellite companies don't have the same regulations. And so it's an unfair practice right there because you have one group that has one set of rules and another group that has another set of rules. So no, I don't think that the cable companies should be regulated. The large drink ban was overturned by the courts. I didn't know that, Bird, but the idea that it was passed is disgusting. All right, let me. I'm just trying to do the stuff addressed to me. Sorry if I missed something, but I'm way behind because I've been rambling too much. Peter says on Noah's flood is Noah's flood is not scientifically possible. I know, but that's what I'm just saying that's the argument I would use. But you have to, if you're talking. I am not a young Earth creationist, Peter. So don't worry. You don't have to prove it to me, but you have to demonstrate why it's not possible. To just say it's not scientifically possible, they're going to go, yeah, prove it. And then you're just going to say, but science. And they're like, well, that's not an answer. Piano Dean says, if God is powerful enough to create the universe, he's powerful enough to cause a worldwide flood and help Noah create an ark to survive it. That's absolutely true. If God wanted to, he's absolutely powerful enough to do it. I'm not suggesting that he's not. However, and this is the other part of it, is there evidence that this actually happened? Some people argue yes, some people argue no. I'm not taking a side in that right now. And to me, whether or not the flood actually happened is irrelevant. Because it truly does not. My faith in God and my belief in God are not based on whether or not there was a giant flood some 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Luke says, Noah's Ark is Judeo-Christian mythology. Any scientist or engineer worth his salt knows that either the Ark or the flood are physically impossible. That doesn't discredit the text. Thank you for putting that that way. That doesn't discredit the text. Is that people don't understand that, for example, just because that may not be possible doesn't mean there's not a very, very valuable lesson to be learned in the story. And this is where I know a lot of people, they say, oh, heresy, you're suggesting that's not literally true. Well, let me ask you this. I've had this conversation with some religious literalists, and I'd say, okay, was the Good Samaritan an actual person? After all, the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan is in the Bible. So is that an actual person? Because you know what? Jesus taught based on the concept called parables. A parable is a fictitious story with a theological theme to it, right? So the Good Samaritan is not about an actual Samaritan. It's just an example that Jesus used to say what being a neighbor to someone else really means. And same thing with, Jesus taught in parables all the time. If Jesus is God and Jesus used parables all the time, why is it so hard to believe that the book of Genesis is actually a book of parables? I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to wrap their heads around. Rega dissed the flood. Scriptures say the water sprung forth from the deep, and the science corroborates that there are vast reservoirs of water beneath the Earth's crust. That's true, Aberjam. And like I said, I'm not going to argue about whether the flood happened or not. I'm just saying, to me, it's irrelevant. But if you're going to attack someone who is a literalist, and you're saying the flood didn't happen, they say the flood did, that's where I would focus my argument, is over the science of it. And Luke says it definitely disqualifies it for plain reading. Well, the problem with the Bible, and this is a genuine problem, is that people, whether you're a believer or not, people don't take it seriously enough to really study it. Because to understand what the Bible says, you can't just read an English translation of the Bible and have it and get it. You really have to look at the Greek and the Hebrew and what those words mean, and the style that they were written in, and context of the culture of the day and stuff. There's so much you have to take into account to really get a good understanding of it. And just one quick example that I'll use. Man, I've been rambling a lot in this stream. Sorry, guys. But one quick example on that is the idea of homosexuality. Right? People have been having the fight over homosexuality for a very long time, but it's really... Sorry, I'm reaching over to make some coffee while I'm talking. But it's really come to a head in recent years. And one of the reasons that people get upset about it is that homosexuality has the unique distinction of being the one and only sin listed in the Bible as being an abomination. And so so it's, people get really worked up about that, And of course, many Christians, particularly more fundamentalist Christians, like to preach a gospel of hatred directed at homosexuals. Look at the Westboro Baptist Church, which I think is anti-Christian. And we get into all these tiffs about homosexuality. Well, first and foremost, and I point this out to any Christian that wants to sit there and talk about homosexuality and how horrible homosexuals are. Question number one, is homosexuality a sin? Yes. Okay. Question number two, is homosexuality blasphemy of the Holy Spirit? No? Okay. Well, in that case, homosexuality is forgiven like every other sin. Can we now move on? Right? That's point number one. Point number two is that if you look at the Greek and Hebrew texts, abomination is a horrible, horrible mistranslation. The actual term that should be used when describing homosexuality based on the biblical account is unclean. And if you think about particularly the day that it was written, but also the general attitudes that some people do have towards that kind of thing, I think unclean is a more fitting choice of terminology. But the problem is most people don't go through the trouble to actually research that. They just see it's an abomination and they forget about the fact that it's, regardless of whether it's called an abomination or just plain wrong, it doesn't matter. If it's a sin and it's not blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, it's forgiven. And if the person is not a believer, they're not a Christian, guess what the Bible says you should do in that case? The answer is nothing. And in fact, Paul writes very clearly that the last thing that we should ever be doing is expecting non-Christians to behave like Christians, because they're not Christians. So stop getting on people about their practices that are contrary to your beliefs because they don't share your beliefs. But that's taking the Bible as it's actually meant to be, as opposed to trying to use it to forward a particular agenda. Ms. Miles says, I think mocking ideas often makes for someone to re-examine their beliefs. You do it yourself with Trek. For example, you will mock Discovery, but not its fans. That's a fair point, Miles. I do think that's a fair point. But I think that if you're going to mock something, you better have some facts to back it up. That's the important thing. You have to have a genuine argument behind your mockery, because if you don't, then it comes off as just a hollow insult. And I'm sure you would probably agree with me on that. Darren is in the house, says, good morning, nice background, how are things? I'm hurting like an SOB, Darren, but good to see you, my friend. Mr. Miles says, you will have moved on by now, but you talked about faith. I'd like to point out there's a big difference between blind faith and evidence-based faith. Yes, and the Bible does not advocate for blind faith. Luke says, the nuance I had is specifically regarding objects and fields of work. You can be confident in those, but you can't be faithful to those. Well, except if faith if I have faith that this chair will hold me up, I think that's a fair statement. Now, you can also say I have confidence, because faith and confidence can be used as synonyms, as can faith and trust. Did you see the new video put out by Trek website? They added SCD to it. Now, I have not seen the video, but someone sent me a screenshot of it, which I thought was hilarious that they fixed it. It only discredits the plain reading to a non-believer if they don't believe that a hypothetical God could not achieve the supernatural. Well, that's a problem too, Aberjam, is that, and that's why, generally speaking, and this is when the reason I don't argue a lot, especially with atheists. I don't argue about the flood. I don't argue about the 6 days of creation. I don't argue even about the miracles of Jesus with atheists. And the reason for that is because of the very simple fact that they don't believe that God exists. Then obviously Jesus couldn't turn water into wine. Obviously the flood couldn't happen. Obviously the world couldn't have been created in 6 days. We need to have a more basic conversation. The one and only topic of discussion to have with a true atheist is, does God exist? Once you get past that, then we can argue about, and that's where, like, if I'm arguing with a fellow Christian, I'll argue about the flood, or we'll argue about whatever. Although, for the most part, that's wasted. The main thing that I prefer to argue about is the fundamental stuff that's important. Darren says, why does free will conflict with predestiny? Seems to me you can have both. Well, it's not a matter of the predestination that Calvinists believe in is not the same as the predestination that you see in the actual Bible. I think that the way that you could look at it is, okay, God exists outside of what we call space and time, right? So God can see the past, present, future as one. He's in a very unique perspective. Now, if you could see past, present, future all at once, then predestination becomes easy. If you set up circumstances here, you can immediately see the results of those circumstances. And then you can say, ooh, that's not what I want, and tweak it, and it fixes, tweak it and fix, tweak and fix. And so, and it does show in the Bible that when necessary, God will remove someone's free will. Pharaoh is the best example in the book of Exodus, that God actually made it so that Pharaoh would not turn over the Jews so that he could demonstrate his power, so that things would happen the way he wanted them to unfold. However, for the most part, he lets us do whatever we want to do. Just because he knows what our ultimate choices were doesn't change the fact that we have free will. And Trek says, you're absolutely right on that point. No idea what point that was, but thank you. Calvinists believe there is no free will, yet conveniently deny that God is responsible for making us sin. Just one of the many inconveniences. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. The Calvinistic view on free will is and irresistible grace and all that stuff is and limited atonement. Ugh. Don't even get me started on limited atonement. Those kind of things are absolutely antithetical to the Bible. Luke says, in the comments I used an example, how can you love and become a fan of a movie you haven't seen? Ergo, you can't be a Christian if you don't even know what the Christian faith is. Well, and that's the sad thing, is that many people are, that's why I call them Christians in name only. You're right. You shouldn't, like, how can you love God if you don't know God? Right? How can you have faith in God if you don't believe in God? And so you got to take it one step at a time. Before you can have a genuine faith in God, a saving faith, as people like to call it, you have to first believe that God exists. And let's see. Peter says, Jeff always prays when he's here, Auntie. Very good. Let's see. If I go to hell, I hope I will burn well. I'll spend my days with JFK, Marvin Gaye, Martha Ray, and Lawrence Welk. Well, that's also a very faulty view of what hell is. You're not going to be on fire and hanging out with Kurt Cobain, Kojak, and all that. In fact, my personal view on hell is that you are dead. So, no, you won't be hanging out for eternity with all the other people that were damned. Like the whole thing is, I want to party with the sinners rather than, praise with the saints, right? And because it sounds, all those people, they're a lot more fun, right? Well, if you look at the way the Revelation is set up, people that are condemned, people that don't get into heaven, are then subsequently destroyed. They no longer exist after judgment. And so to them, and that's kind of an ironic thing, is that in a very real sense, the atheists get exactly what they expect. And Bird said, "Help! Can you power down the server even if you have to pull the plug? I need to reboot and try to save game." Yes, Bird. Let me let's see. What can I do here? Well, I need to. It'll take me a couple minutes, Bird. So let me do it after the live stream. So if you don't mind, Bird. Text me the minute the live stream ends to remind me if, and hopefully I'll remember, but text me the minute the live stream ends and we'll get that thing restarted. Jeff, let's see. Jeff prays when he pops around. I forgot about that one. Once he was thankful for science fiction. I'm thankful for science fiction. I am. And I mean, I thank God all the time for things like Star Trek and stuff that have helped me in many ways. And I know people say, well, God didn't create Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry did. Yes, but, well, God created Gene Roddenberry. So, suck on that. Have you seen Darren's video about ancient giant and fossilized trees can fit this into a biblical viewpoint of the world? Could Noah have used said trees to build the ark? I have not seen Darren's video on that as of yet. However, that sounds like a good question for Darren. Track 95 says religion and politics often have the same issues, things which bring people together are ignored and the focus on the differences. That's very true. And actually, the funny thing is, religion and politics, the reason they're so closely related is because they're both ideologies. And the problem is that people, it's not just like when Miles was talking about blind faith, meaning faith without evidence, there's also blind faith in that I am going to stick to this even when I know it's wrong. And that's the kind of blind faith that we see from the Democrats and Republicans in this country. They are going to, like, and I'm not going to say anything about the impeachment of Trump, but they're going to say that anything Trump does is bad because he's Trump. Not because he actually, Trump may have actually done, I know this is a newsflash to people. Trump didn't do everything bad, right? And so let's say that he passes some piece of legislature that you actually like. You're not going to give him credit for that because he's Trump. And therefore it's corrupted and it's bad and it's horrible, right? People forget about the good things that people they oppose did. It's so funny because like shortly after 9/11, the United States, and I know a lot of you are too young to remember this, but the United States was 100% unified behind one man, George W. Bush. And George Bush rose to the occasion. He led like I've never seen in my lifetime and inspired people like I've never seen in my lifetime. And it was just beautiful to see. When he stood on that rubble and spoke to the people clearing out the rubble, it was a moment that was absolutely beautiful. But within a couple of years, George Bush is an idiot. George Bush is a monkey. George Bush is bad. He stole the election, blah, 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 blah. And so it just turned into the same old crap. And Track 95 says, I promise if you ever do that, I will call you on it. Good. I want you to. I want to be held accountable. Because if we don't hold each other accountable, then we end up, believing in things that are just patently false. And let's see. Piano Dean says, man, I would love to talk to you about some stuff sometime. If you ever have vacation in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, we've got to have lunch. I'll tell you, Piano Dean, if and when we get to a point where this channel is my full-time job, not this channel, but the Anti-Trekker channel, obviously, this channel will probably always just be a place to go off on random topics that I can't talk about on the main channel. But if I ever do get to a point where YouTube is my full-time job, the next step, and I've talked about this from day one, the next step after that is to start traveling and meeting as many of you as possible. And that is absolutely my ultimate goal and my ultimate plan. I absolutely want to go to France and I want to have some real French coffee with a view of the Eiffel Tower and fight with Luke over various stuff. I absolutely want to go to London and have some, I don't know, fish and chips near Big Ben and argue with Dr. Alex about stuff. I absolutely want to go to Ireland and go to a pub and hang out with Darth Revan and fight about stuff. I want to meet as many of you as I possibly can before I die. However, I have to one step at a time. First, I have to get this channel to where it sustains our family, and then and Mr. Miles, obviously, and then get to a point where I can actually start to travel. It won't be that hard to do the show on the road once that happens, because all we need is a good internet connection. But this green screen behind me is basically barely bigger than what you see. It's and it is actually, it's really good. I found it on Amazon. This is a really awesome green screen because it folds up into a cylinder that's about that big around and that long. And so I can pack that easy enough. Then I just need to get a really good solid laptop computer that can handle my microphone and a good webcam for the road, and we're set. So I absolutely do think it's possible. It's just a matter of time. And will this channel grow to that point? I hope and I pray that it does, but I don't know that it will because I don't have a crystal ball. Luke says, that's one thing I thoroughly dislike in the modern American clerics. They're paid like those horrible Catholic cardinals criticized in the Renaissance, greed and vanity. Well, I don't mind them being paid, but I don't think that a person, a full-time minister, should have to worry about the bills. But I also don't think they should be getting rich. Um, no, being a leader in church should not depend on salary. He's still got. Let's see. He's still got the majority of his beliefs. Well, that's the thing, is that, yeah, if you are and I understand if you can't make ends meet, that's different, right? So, like, for example, if I'm living in an area and I'm making $40,000 and the minimum salary to just survive is like 60,000, and I'm not getting my housing paid for or anything, then yeah, I understand. That would be I'd have to take on a second job, so I wouldn't be available during those hours. I get that. However, if your house is paid for, your car is paid for, your phone's paid for, which means that all your salary really needs to cover is your basic utilities and entertainment and food, then, don't you have, first of all, you should not, a pastor like that should not, under any circumstances, have a secondary job, because that job is a 24/7 job, because you don't know when somebody's going to be hurting, and you don't know when one of your parishioners is going to get hit by a car, is going to suddenly, be diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, is, whatever happens, or something wonderful happens, they have a new baby or whatever. I've been there for the good stuff too. But you need, as a pastor, you need to be available 24/7. You absolutely need to. And that the fact that you would limit that, but still not, yeah, that makes me mad. And let's go back to, and again, I'm sorry I'm so far behind on the chat, guys. This is just a crazy day. Mr. Ron says, well, I think of it like this. Take food, for example. I don't want to throw the dice that a company doesn't recognize it's cutting corners in areas that could be harmful to me. Well, but you see, remember, what did I say before, Mr. Miles? Things that are necessities of life are the exception. Food is a necessity of life. I'm not saying get rid of the ADA. Or is it the ADA? FDA. Wow. Food and Drug Administration. I'm not saying get rid of the FDA. Food does need to be regulated as far as making sure that, like, you can't have lead in your food, you can't have arsenic in your food. Listing the ingredients I'm fine with, and those ingredients need to be accurate, and the government needs to test to make sure they're accurate and all that. I have no problem with that. However, if someone wants to sell a 5-gallon drum of Coca-Cola, not cocaine, I have no problem with that. And by the way, when you get to drugs, I'm actually pro-legalization. Darren says, yeah, would someone call the deliberate misinformation regarding where the money you pay for your cable someone call the deliberate misinformation regarding where the money you pay for your cable bill goes a conspiracy? Well, it's not a conspiracy because it's forced on the cable company by the federal government. In fact, not only are the channels regulated by the government, and of course all that money goes there. The way that cable companies and phone companies and stuff, and you know this, Darren, the way that they construct their bills is regulated by the government. I'm sorry, that's the government poking its nose in where it's unnecessary. Look, if you want to have Verizon, or you want to have AT&T for your phone, or you want to have Comcast or Cox for your cable, or whatever, but do I really care about having a 17-page bill that breaks it down 3 different ways that I can't understand anyway, when I would just rather it say, Mays Cable, $100? I don't need a 17-page bill for that. Luke says, the problem I see with laissez-faire capitalism is it thinks the market sorts itself crisis out. That is yet to be observed, much like communist theory. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. The market sorts itself crisis out. I assume you mean, like, if there's a crisis that the market will recover? Is that what you're saying? But let me give you an example of why I think government intervention in the economy is negative. The housing market is a perfect example. In the United States today, houses are way too expensive. And I mean way overvalued. The house that I live in currently has a value of about $300,000. Realistically, this house should probably be worth about $100,000. In California, there are houses that will be worth $3-4 million that should be worth about $100,000. So why this incredible disparaging number? Because of governmental interference in the home market. Because the government comes up with creative ways to force banks to give people loans that shouldn't get loans, so they get larger and larger and larger loans. And here's what happens. When you make it so that people have access to $300,000, then the price of the house immediately goes to $300,000. It's just like, it's so ironic that, like, banking regulations is another beautiful example. The government says, you know what, when you deposit that check, the bank has to have that money ready in your account within 3 days. So what does the bank do? They wait 3 days. That's not the spirit of the law. They're following the letter of the law. They're saying, oh, they give us 3 days? Fine, we're going to hold on to that check for 3 days so that we can make a little interest on it before we make it available to you. And so the problem is that when the government, a lot of times when the government tries to fix a problem, they just create a new one. I think the new War of the Worlds is on Fox there. And then he says, oh, that's Disney Plus. Yeah. So I don't know if it'll be on Disney Plus or not, but I'll keep an eye out for it. Trek95 says you're not rambling at all. Well, the timestamps begs to differ. That you left that message at 10:44. It's now 11:09. I am way the heck behind. I'm a bird of prey numbers right here. That's not like me. I cannot say that Noah is a real person or the flood happened, but it's a great story either way. I agree. And you know what? I don't care if Noah was a real person, because whether Noah actually existed or not has zero impact on my life today. It really doesn't. I'm not religious, duh, but I do believe there was a giant flood or several during that time frame. There are many similar stories from unrelated people in history. Right, but here's the thing, and I know what you're talking about. There is evidence that there have been catastrophic floods around the world at various times. And I'm not trying to, believe me, I don't want to turn this live stream into a big debate about Noah's flood. But it is, to me, looking at it, more likely that there was a series of large floods that affected pretty much every part of the world, as opposed to a singular flood that literally coated the entire planet in water. However, I am, like I said, my faith in God and my belief in God is not based on whether or not there was a big flood. Wouldn't the end of the Ice Age cause flooding? Not overnight, but flooding all the same. Well, the funny thing is, though, is that, like, yeah, if you suddenly melted the polar ice caps instantly, you would probably have a tsunami that would cover the majority of the landmass. And boy, that would be horrible. But fortunately, the ice caps melt slowly. And that's an ironic thing about, the global warming alarmist crowd, because they do, anybody, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, like, limit our emissions in the atmosphere. I'm all for clean air, but the main reason I'm for clean air is because I got to breathe it, and I want clean air. But that being said, the polar ice caps eventually are going to melt. We are on the receding end of an ice age, but we are still in that ice age. And if you look at the geological standard, my sister is actually a geologist, and I was arguing with her about this. But the definition of an ice age is extreme differences in temperatures between the equator and the poles, and is typified by ice at the poles. Guess what? We're in an ice age. Right? In a non-ice age period, which the Earth has had several, then there's no ice on the top and bottom of the planet. Sorry. We are still in an ice age. But yeah. Peter says, look, if you believe in God, I believe in you. So when I am with you, I will pray with you. If it was that time. That's an interesting way to put it. But I would rather you believe in God than you believe in me believing in God. Because I'd be more concerned about your soul and whether or not you actually have a belief and then a faith. Did you see the Star Trek timeline video at StarTrek.com? I watched it and there was no mention of Discovery, and then the next day I watched it again and had Discovery in it. I've not seen it yet, but I am very glad to say that I downloaded and recorded the original version of the video, and so I am in fact going to go back and see the new one and probably do a video about it and say, looks like they saw my video. Which ironically, that video that I put out criticizing them got demonetized. Um, and let's see. Joseph says homosexuality is a sin comes from the same guy who does not allow to wear two different fabrics and long hair on men. So it's a bunch of your avatar. Well, I wouldn't go that far, Joseph. I think that there are differing, and this is something that's difficult, another difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around. There are different regulations in the Bible for different purposes. A lot of the stuff in the Old Testament was addressed to a specific group of people at a specific time for a specific duration. And some of that had very good reasons. Like, for example, the ban on pork. If you look at the state of the world at the time that the ban on pork was put in, it's probably a good idea to put a ban on pork. However, in the modern world, pork is perfectly safe. However, Christ also lifted that ban specifically. When you look at the mixing of fabrics and stuff like that, some of that was ceremonial, some of it was for cleanliness and hygiene, some of it was spiritual. And the hard part can be to try and sort out the difference between them all, and which ones are relevant and which ones are not. Regarding parable versus literal, Jewish tradition is to include a genealogy or family tree to validate people and events are true. Noah the flood is included in this practice. Well, that's an interesting, and you know what, Aberjam, that's true, that a lot of times they do use genealogy to validate things, which is also why, of course, a couple of the Gospels start with a genealogy for Jesus. But whether or not the... like I said, my point about it is whether or not the flood is parable or literal does not change my life. This cup of coffee is not going to change based on whether or not the flood actually happened. Luke says, science never confirmed that there are huge reservoirs of water under the crust, like one said in the comment. Is creation a study that has been confirmed in court as pseudoscience? Well, I'm not going to get into that argument, Luke. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. All right. I'm not a geologist. My sister is, but I am not. I don't know if there's huge reserves of water under the crust. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. I've heard people argue that there are. I've heard people say that, oh, that's a bunch of hooey. I don't know. And that's one thing that, and I know this is something tough for some people to wrap their heads around. I don't put my faith in hearsay. Whether that hearsay comes from young earth creationists or scientific apologists. If you want to say, well, science says X, okay, fine. In order for me to say, oh, that's absolutely true, I would need to see all the evidence and be able to understand it, which I know is not going to happen because I'm not going to become a geologist overnight. However, like I said, as far as the Noahic flood, it's irrelevant to me. And so it doesn't matter if you can't prove or you can prove reserves of water under the crust. Heard a religious lady on the radio program say abortions were an abomination. Yeah, funny, abortions are not mentioned in the Bible. And I am anti-choice. I do not believe that there's a biblical, I know people say, oh, but life is sacred. I understand that. And I do believe that life is sacred. But I also am a pragmatist. And I understand that there are times that abortion is necessary. And so that's why I'm anti-choice, in that I believe, just like almost every other medical procedure that is done today, if a doctor certifies that it is medically necessary, you do it. If a doctor cannot certify that it is medically necessary, you do not do it. End of discussion. It's not a political issue at all. What bothers me in plain words of the Bible is, like for others, their inability to understand two things. And then he says, ... One, the Bible has been written by multiple flawed humans. Two, those humans had political context in mind. Judea was occupied by Greeks when the Old Testament was written. Well, I disagree with you on that for a couple of things. First of all, Luke, that you're not taking into account, and I understand, because if you're an atheist, you would reject it out of hand. And this is why I don't argue about these types of things with atheists, is that you're not taking into account the idea of divine inspiration. That the Bible is actually, yes, it's written by multiple flawed humans, but those multiple flawed humans were in fact directed by God to do so, which is why it's accurate But here's the problem. And this is one thing I really like about our church is in our church's doctrines we talk about biblical inerrancy. But we have a big old asterisk on that biblical inerrancy that I believe in 100%, which is that the original Bible books are 100% accurate and inerrant. The problem is we don't have the originals. We only have the manuscripts that we have access to. So you have to look at it very, very carefully. You have to study it. You have to compare the different manuscripts and stuff. It's a very interesting process, and to determine what ultimately is the closest thing to the ultimate truth of it. However, now that being said, that's one of the reasons that nobody should be pretending that they know 100%, because they don't. But the fact that the Bible is written by flawed humans doesn't change the idea of divine inspiration. And as far as political context in mind, I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. Yeah, Judea was occupied by the Greeks when the Old Testament was written. That doesn't change the meaning of what's written there. I don't understand what your point is. And was Judea occupied by the Greeks when the Old Testament was written? Because some of the Old Testament was written, I believe, before. Well, when was Greek founded? I'd have to look. Greece founded, but yeah. Anyway, I would argue that there's a big leap from I believe there's a creator to I believe in a personal God, and there's another leap to go to a specific brand of theism. I would agree with you, Mr. Miles, but that's why in argumentation I want to focus on God. Is there a God? Because we're not going to. You and me have talked about it a little bit, Mr. Miles. You and I are never going to agree on, say, any particular doctrine of religion, because you're going to sit there from the perspective of God doesn't exist. And if God doesn't exist, then obviously Christ didn't turn water into wine. Obviously he didn't walk on water. Obviously he wasn't crucified. Obviously, none of that stuff happened. So I'm not going to sit there and argue with you over Christ turning water into wine, or whether or not the Noahic flood was legit, or whether or not the plagues of Exodus took place. Why? Because if you don't believe in God, of course none of that happened. In your mind. So the only thing we can really have a rational argument about is, does God exist? And anyway, and then Mr. Miles says, if you convince me God was really, you still have to work out of you to convince me Jesus is that God. I agree. But that's the thing. It's one step at a time. So the natural progression is from atheist to theist, and then from theist to probably a Christian, and then from Christian to a particular set of doctrines, philosophies, etc. But you can't go from atheist to Christian. Some people do, but I will tell you, that's like in the parable of the sower of the seed. A lot of the times that ends up the seed spread on the pathway, so it sprouts and then dies. I saw a YouTube video that had more dislikes on it than it had views. Wow, that's interesting. I've never seen that. And Berta Praise said, never mind. I had a little notification that anti-server started playing Space Engineers, so I'm assuming you mean that you got it right. You got it fixed. It's Space Pope Reptilian. Is the Space Pope reptilian? Yes, the Space Pope is indeed reptilian. Have you gotten Season 2 of Discovery yet? If so, watch the special features. There's one that shows how they built their Enterprise bridge. I haven't bought the DVDs. I have an active membership with CBS. I don't know if they're on the CBS page. If they are, I'll check it out, because there are a lot of extras on the CBS All Access, but I haven't checked them out. Just like the same is true, by the way, with Disney Plus. Like there's a few behind the scenes Star Wars documentaries and stuff that I really want to watch. But I'm going to take a look. Let's see. We'll go to CBS real. Well, no, I'm not going to do it right now. But and by the way, for those of you on the nerd front, Clone Wars. A lot of people have been arguing that I should watch Clone Wars because it's so freaking awesome, right? I still hate the animation style. I absolutely hate the animation style. The story's pretty good. but I do not like the animation. Um, let's see. Dan says, do you like when people make a religious pilgrim to somewhere once a year or certain times? Do I like when people do it? I don't care if people do it. I don't have a problem with it. I would love to go to the quote unquote Holy Land one day, but I don't. I'm not going to Mecca like Muslims do. I'm not going on a pilgrimage. I just like to go just to see it. But as far as I know, some people like making a religious experience out of going to some place. I don't see it, because as far as I can understand from at the point of the New Testament, God no longer resided in a place. Dan has Discovery Season 2 on DVD. Very good. Well, it sounds like that would be an interesting to see how they built the Enterprise Bridge. And I actually I'm going to be working on, after I get this review of The Mandalorian done, I'm going to be working on that short trek, Ask Not, because I think there's some interesting little nuggets in there. 9/11 was a great day for Bush and his strengths. IG, that's allowable to say. Okay. But the problem is that people very quickly forgot. And Miles says the Earth can't be flat because it's hollow. I don't know anything about the hollow Earth idea, but yeah. But then we had his known nose speech. Well, Bush is, the thing about Bush is that he's very folksy with the way that he speaks. He's not particularly articulate, but he's just like the kind of guy that you'd have a beer with, and he seems like a nice guy. But the funny thing is, Trump is the anti-Bush, if you will. He is like Bush. He's not particularly well articulate, but his mannerisms are very harsh New Yorker, as opposed to folksy Texan. And so while Bush comes across as very, very friendly, Trump comes across as very, very tough. But the argument that people make about both of them is that they're stupid because they're not eloquent. Eloquence does not make one intelligent. It just makes one eloquent. Notice how Antrick didn't put me on his to meet list. He's starting to realize it's a lost cause. No. Actually, I told you, Mr. Miles, that one day I will make it to California, and you and I are going to, embark on some Californian herbal recipes and have long conversations about the existence of God, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. You want to come to Newcastle upon Tyne? Better fish and chips. Oh, well, in that case, I will do that, Peter. Well, and of course, that's definitely, I want to go all over the place. So, I mean, I got people on every continent except for Antarctica, fortunately. But I want to go to Canada and meet Captain Foley. I absolutely do want to travel around, but not because, and that's the funny thing. I want to travel the world, but I don't give a crap about the places. I want to meet the people. Enter recent, the entire DW City of Death with Luke, but who shall be Romania? I'm not sure what you're talking about there, John. I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about there. Peter says, you're wanting a sturdy laptop. Get an Acer. I bash the old thing round no end. Well, it's going to be a little while before I need to get a high-end laptop to be able to do the streaming and stuff and recording for Miles and stuff while I'm on the road. So it'll be a little while before I can afford a laptop like that. I saw a lot of cars recently with that religious fish symbol on the back. What's your opinion of the use of the religious symbols? I actually have one major problem with those symbols. If you want to stick a fish on the back of your car to advertise that you're a Christian, fine. I don't care. I don't think it makes you a better person. But if that's what you want to do, I don't have a problem with it. What I have a problem with is when you put a fish on the back of your car and then you cut me off in traffic. Okay? Now you're saying I'm a Christian, but I'm a jerk. And you're not doing me any favors when I'm trying to tell people that being a Christian means being a kind, loving, wonderful person, because you're being a dick behind the wheel and you put that fish on there so everybody says, oh yeah, we know how Christians drive. That's something that our pastor talked about actually at church last night, is that if you are known to be the Christian in your group, then you darn well better be the best example, right? If you're the Christian at work, you better be there on time. You better be doing your best in your job. Better not be talking back to the boss, because that you're putting out there that you are an ambassador for Christianity. And I took a big gamble on my channel by coming out, so to speak, as a Christian on Anti-Trekker, and I did it because I felt I needed to, but I feel like I have a solid reputation among the nerd community, and that reputation is, the one that I'm a guy. I'm not a complete dick like some people. I'm also, I'm not hardcore one way or the other. I kind of try to examine everything piece by piece. And I think that a lot of you guys follow the channel because you like the fact that I speak the world as I see it, as opposed to through some ideological lens. Dan says, is this a religious emoji? Well, it looks like a person on his knees, I'm assuming under a roof. So I would guess that's a person praying in church. So sure, I guess it's a religious emoji. You're welcome here. You like to try our dumplings with sheep cheese and kofala, which is a Coke-like drink. Well, sheep cheese sounds disgusting, but I will definitely try kofala. Coca-Cola used to have drugs in it back when it was first made. Yes, it had cocaine, or coca in the original recipe, but then it was banned, so they got rid of it. And the original Coke was actually advertised as a medicinal tonic. And it would help things like fatigue. Think about it. It had cocaine in it. Yep, sure did help with fatigue. Laissez-faire capitalism thinks absence of regulation avoids and solve crises. This is yet to happen. Well, here's the thing. Crises will always happen. But the problem is overt overregulation can make a crisis worse. So, for example, in the United States, sooner or later, there will be a massive housing crisis. Because what's going to happen is, and we got a hint of it, a few years back, but nothing like what's going to eventually happen, because the government keeps propping up the housing market. And because of all this federal interference in the free market, it's getting worse and worse and worse, where people, like right now, it's getting to a point that in many parts of the country, the only way you can ever afford to purchase a house is if somebody dies and leaves you a house and you sell it so that you can buy another house. That's how bad it is, right? Houses are a house should cost about 2 times your annual salary. So if you make $50,000 a year, you should be able to buy a house for $100,000. Well, you know what? In California, most people don't have an income of $2 or $3 million to buy a $4 or $5 million house. It doesn't work that way. And so eventually, the market is going to correct itself. And when that happens, a lot of people that have very expensive homes are going to freak out, because all of a sudden you're going to have people that'll have a mortgage where they owe $3 million for this house and the house is worth $100,000. And it will happen. And people are going to freak out and say how unfair it is. And then the government's going to step in and say, well, we'll subsidize it, and that'll just make it worse. So, it's the absence of regulation doesn't avoid or solve the crisis. However, the presence of regulation frequently causes crises. Another example of regulation I support, take metal, for example, compare China to the U.S. I would never trust Chinese metals such as the U.S. ones because of regulations and standards. But here's the thing. I believe in markets self-regulating, and they do this from time to time. For example, the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, right? They rate the movies. That's where you get the G, PG, PG-13, R, and C-17 rating. That was created to avoid governmental regulations and ratings of movies. And I'm all for that. Now, as far as metallurgy is concerned, if you have American metal corporations that are trying to compete with Chinese, well, they would make sure that they have the highest quality, and then they could set up and support a independent group to test said metals. So the people that cared about that, like contractors that are into construction and stuff, would see the difference. And let's be real. Most people that use Chinese metals are doing it because they want to save costs, and they're going to use it knowing that it's inferior. Aberjam says, I watched last week's sermon at Experience. You should educate them on the errors of using Rotten Tomatoes as an authority on movies. Oh, you're so right. Yes. Isaac, I'll tell you, when Isaac said that last week, he was talking about submitting to authority. And he said that, he's not an expert on movies and he submits to Rotten Tomatoes. I wanted to slap him, but I know he's not a cinephile, so it's all right. According to Clownfish TV, Disney raised Hulu cost by $10 and only found out by email. Not sure if you have Hulu or not. Well, first of all, I do have Hulu, but I do not have the Hulu Disney Plus package. I bought Disney Plus on the side. And so my Disney Plus is $6.99. My Hulu has not changed. And the reason for that is twofold. One, the Hulu part of it, I pay a little extra for my Hulu for the commercial free, and I didn't know how that would work with adding Disney Plus to it. Also, and this is something that's kind of important to me, is long term. Disney Plus is a business expense. Hulu is not, because Hulu is the family entertainment. Disney Plus is specifically for anti-tracker. That's the only reason I have Disney Plus. And same is true of CBS All Access. And so as those are going down on the ledger as business expenses. But Hulu is not. That's a family entertainment product. The government follows lobby. The government follows lobby policies. Lobby policies are fixed by companies and benefits to companies. You're literally trusting the persons responsible for the problem. Well, I'm not sure what that has to do with laissez-faire versus regulation. The problem is the existence of lobbyists. But you can't get rid of lobbyists because people have a right to address their congressperson. And so if somebody is paid to go address the congressperson on behalf of someone else, it's an ugly system. The problem is not the existence of lobbyists, though. The problem is the fact that many governmental officials will let the lobbyists wine and dine them and then do whatever the lobbyists want so they can get those big campaign contributions. It's a waste to get a telephone bill that says you owe 17 cents. I've seen those kind of bills, yes. I do believe there could be an entire planet just water. Or, sorry, saying, do I believe that's possible? I do not believe that's possible because based on my understanding, and no offense to Darren if you're still here, but based on my understanding as far as gravity and all that, if you had a mass the size of Earth that was 100% water, at the center of said mass, the pressure and everything would be so high that water couldn't exist in that environment. And so I don't know if it would be ice or if it would be something else where the hydrogen and oxygen, was forced into some other state. But I don't think water can't exist under those kind of pressures. Now, ice planet, yeah, that's possible, but not the size of Earth. I don't think that the mass that large could be. You would still have to have some kind of rocky core. At least my understanding of planetary physics is. But Dr. Alex would be the person to ask about that, not me. Another argument ruling out the flood. We know that there have been geological times where there was no ice caps whatsoever. For example, the time of the dinosaurs, they didn't drown. Yes, I know, Luke, but I'm not arguing about it. I don't know why you want to keep arguing about it. I'm not arguing for or against the flood. I'm just saying that that's irrelevant and how I would argue if I was going to attack a young Earth creationist on it. I did take a screenshot from the Google drawing image of both sides of the videos. The Star Trek timeline once the picture has no discovery. Yeah. Like I said, I'm gonna, now that they've updated the video, I'm gonna download that version of the video and probably do a little side-by-side comparison. Who said CBS might see your video? Hint, me. I don't think CBS saw my video. I think probably some person at CBS saw that and said, hey, you left out Discovery. And they were like, oops. Let's see. Well, I know for sure they saw the Kirk versus Discovery video because it was manually content claimed. Well, possibly, but that's still, just because they claimed it doesn't mean, because it's a weird thing. They, CBS and other companies hire people to just scour the internet and look for violations of their copyright. All right, so I've seen a documentary about cartoon scrubbers that capture air pollution, carbon scrubbers that capture air pollution and cleanse the air. Problem is extremely costly to set up and not hard to maintain. Well, if the initial expense is high, then yeah, that's a problem. Now, see, Valor says it seems a lot of useful technology can help clean up our own mess won't be used because it costs too much. Well, that is a problem. And here's the thing: if the government is, I don't think that the government should be um, overtly subsidizing various industries. I don't like corporate welfare overall. However, if we're looking at, say, a problem with factories putting out pollution and it is not possible for your average company to afford it, I could understand if you did, in the name of, say, the EPA, a certain amount of budgetary for subsidizing said scrubbers, right? And people would have to apply for it and show why they deserve to get the subsidy. Because remember, I did say before that one of the regulations I don't have a problem with is anti-pollution regulations. I don't want you, as Sting said in the classic song, I don't want the factories belching filth into the sky. I would like to have scrubbers on that. So you set up a certain fund for subsidizing it, but only for companies that can prove that they can't afford to set it up themselves. However, the larger companies can't afford to do it themselves. Another interesting point to dwell on regarding the flood: if it didn't happen, why would God promise not to do it again? Not looking for an answer, just food for thought. That is an interesting point. However, is it that but I think some people just look at the rainbow as just a sign that God is God. Do you think people should put babies in baby grows or T-shirts that say "I love God"? Well, I don't know what the baby grows means, but T-shirts that say "I love God" on a baby. I don't think that. I don't think it's appropriate to put political messages or ideological messages on babies. Period. I get sick to my stomach when I see these pro-choice protesters with little kids holding picket signs about how horrible pro-lifers are, and vice versa. Pro-lifers have little kids holding picket signs with pictures of aborted fetuses. It makes me sick to my stomach that people are using their children like that. And so I don't think that anybody under the age of 18 should be involved in a political protest. Period. My mother used to have a bumper sticker that said, "Dear God, please save me from your followers." I've seen that one. But you know what? While I find the humor in that particular slogan, the problem is that Christians have strayed away from the faith so far that they're unrecognizable as Christians. I think I'll do a video about that. The meaning of homosexuality is unclean in a country occupied by a civilization accepting of homosexuality is rather clear. So you think that the reason the homosexuality was banned was because of the Greek reputation on homosexuality? That's kind of a stretch. So I honestly, I think that's kind of a stretch because I think you're looking for something to be contrary to the Greco-Roman tradition, as opposed to maybe they just didn't want that. Maybe God, for whatever reason, thought that multiplication was more important, which, by the way, at the time that the ban on homosexuality was implemented, there were two things. First of all, hygiene was not what it is today, and so saying it is unclean, probably not all that inaccurate. But besides that, you also had the fact that Israel was a relatively small tribal community, and what God needed them to do was grow and multiply. And if you had a significant number of homosexuals in there, that would stunt the growth of the community. And that's honestly where I think that the ban came from, was to encourage the Israel to grow. Joseph says, "I'm asking you as a dyslexic, where is the dog?" Funny. Actually, the auntie is not up here right now because I'm hurting so bad I didn't want to take a chance that she'd jump up on my leg. Let's see. The natural progression, what about autopsy? Or apostasy, sorry. Autopsy. Man, there's my dyslexia right there. What about it? If you're saying some people stray away from the faith, yeah. And I talked about that in my faith versus belief video, because people that put their faith or in God, in that God will take care of me as opposed to God will take care of the universe, tend to stray away because bad things are going to happen. You're a bit off with how I see things. I don't start with there isn't a God, so it can't be true. It's more of there is no reason to assume it was God. Okay, so you do believe that that the world was created in 6 days. You just don't think that it was God that did it. Gotcha. Um, no, and you get my point, Mr. Miles. It's not. I understand what you're saying. That like if you're trying to explain a natural phenomenon that we can all observe, to say there's no reason to assume that was God, right? Like the beauty of this sunrise. But if we're talking about specific events in the Bible, and this is why I don't argue about them, like the whole flood thing, right? Abraham pointed out very correctly that if God exists and God is omnipotent, God could certainly arrange for the flood to happen, even if there's not enough water in the world for that flood to happen, because he could create some more, right? And then after the flood, he could get rid of it. That's not beyond the abilities of God. So for the atheist who rejects the existence of God patently, what Abraham said there is incoherent and makes no sense, because God doesn't exist. Therefore, God could not create more water for the flood. Get what I'm saying? And so it becomes a pointless conversation. The Mandalorian review in 2 words: impressively unimpressive. I would agree with you in episode 1, and I'll show you, Luke, just so you guys know that I have not just been sitting on my butt the last couple of days. There we go. So this is, and I always forget to turn on the camera when I'm doing it. So this is my editor, and so I've been actually working on a Mandalorian review here. So what you see here is the entirety of my review of part 1, and then it ends with chapter 2, the child. And so now I'm working on that. I'm going to hopefully finish that today, where I talk about chapter 2 of The Mandalorian, which I do think was better than chapter 1. Let's see. I think going all in with faith is always a mistake. Okay. Not sure why, but okay. And, oh, shoot, now I lost where I was. Stupid. Who is making regulation? Comics Code Authority. Man, well, shoot. I'm now completely lost on the chat. I apologize. So I missed a lot of the chat because YouTube has skipped ahead, and now I can't scroll all the way back, so I'm kind of just stuck. So I'm just going to go from where I can. By the way, one thing I did see, someone mentioned the no true Scotsman fallacy. I think that the no true Scotsman fallacy is not applicable to ideologies. And because here's the thing. If you are, let's take religion out of it for a second. Let's say a Republican, right? The Republican platform states, and I don't know, I'm not a Republican, but let's just say that the Republican platform states that you must be pro-life, that you have to be for lower taxes, and you have to be for no universal health care. Let's say that's the Republican platform, all right? And someone says, well, I'm a Republican, but I'm pro-choice, want to raise taxes, and, I want universal health care. Well, then you're not a Republican. All right. If you're talking about if there's a set definition of this is what these people are, and you don't fall into that definition, you are not one of those people. End of discussion. That's why the no true Scotsman fallacy, when people try to yell no true Scotsman, whenever you say, well, they're not really being Christians. Well, no, it's not the same thing. As far as if there is a clear definition of what a Christian is to be, which there is, read the frickin' Bible, and somebody does not follow that, they're not a Christian. End of discussion. They can call themselves a Christian all day long. That's why I say Chino, Christian in name only. Peter says, rent caps, better estimation on how high house is worth. Those would be good too. No, rent control is a horrible thing. It causes the same kinds of problem. It inflates and creates the problem, because when you start putting these types of regulations on it, you break the system. The Comics Code Authority was also created like the MPA to avoid government regulation. Very true. Darth Vader says, "Oh, I keep typing in anti-trigger. We have a saying here. You may be in heaven, and may you be in heaven an hour before the devil finds out you're dead." I've heard that one before. I love that. Who is making regulations, but although it's theologically unsound, who is making regulations, Michael? For what purpose? You'll see lobbies behind most regulations you consider to be responsible for our crises, all for companies' private interests. Luke, the source of the regulation, as far as obviously various companies are always fighting for regulations that benefit their company, right? So, for example, the satellite dish companies are always fighting to make sure that they're not regulated, where companies like Comcast are lobbying to have satellite and cable regulated the same, and to loosen said regulations on the companies. But guess what? The government's going to do what the government's going to do. They are ultimately responsible because regardless of the lobbying, lobbyists are not the Congress, right? And so you can argue that, well, these horrible lobbyists are pushing for one regulation or another. That's true. But you know what? The lobbyists aren't the ones that make the decision. The people elected into office are. They are responsible for their actions. And just because lobbyists are trying to wine and dine them and convince them of one point or another doesn't change the fact that the elected representatives are ultimately the people who vote for, and sign into law these regulations. The buck stops with them. Luke says, that's my point. Laissez-faire capitalism doesn't work and can't work because unchecked private interests always sway the market their way, generating crises. I disagree. And I think that you're seeing, it's just a basic fundamental difference of opinion here, but because all the difference between laissez-faire capitalism and fascism, which is the overt regulation of pretty much everything. The difference is in laissez-faire capitalism, everybody tries to make things work best for them. The way that we have it right now is the government picks which side gets to win and which side gets to lose, because we decide to regulate into oblivion some companies and industries and not others. And so, and ultimately in these types of heavily regulated environments, people don't get what they want, they get what the government tells them they should have. And I don't agree with that. Now, I'm not suggesting, and you know this, Luke, that I'm not suggesting laissez-faire capitalism for everything, only for things that are not life necessities. I don't think that the government needs to regulate everything, but the government currently does regulate just about everything. Let's see. And go on to Dan says Discovery. Oops, I'm not sure, I missed something there. Trek 95. CBS pays a person to search, and they're being paid to report. They are an employee, and they report to the company that employs them. Well, it depends. Like a lot of what they'll do is there are you can like go through contract companies that will do this kind of stuff for you. Like you can pay XYZ Corporation that has 10,000 people that surf the web for crap, or they have their own algorithms that look for stuff. And then it comes up. And by the way, if CBS, by the way, runs an algorithm of their own that files a copyright claim against you, that shows up as CBS filing the claim, but it doesn't necessarily mean a human being actually saw it. But Rational Ranto, your president doesn't believe in climate change. So what? That's irrelevant. You can. I don't care. That's if we're talking about climate change, whether or not Trump believes in it isn't part of the conversation. Darren says, I know what you mean about decorating babies with propaganda. When I was a toddler, everybody made me wear Packer stuff. I ended up not being a football fan. Well, and you know what? If it's something that's not ultimately very important, like I could see like on Halloween, and you have an infant and you put him in a Mr. Spock costume or something. Okay, that's cute, right? And stuff like that. But generally speaking, no, I don't like the idea of putting political messages or religious messages on children that don't understand it. Another says, if there was a pro-life protest outside of a kid's school that said 1 out of 10 of your friends are dead, you never got to meet them. Yeah, see, that's disgusting. That is, I'm sorry. I don't like abortion, but yeah. I don't like it. Oh, there's Mr. Miles says, it's the no true Scotsman fallacy argument. A real Scotsman would do X and so on. That's all I can see whenever I hear a Christian saying, but they aren't real Christians. That's because you're not understanding the real true Scotsman fallacy. So, which I already explained earlier. But if a Christian is called by Christ to, and like I said, it's not that hard to figure out. When asked directly about it, Christ responded, there are two things. Number one is love God. And basically, loving God means keeping his commandments to the best of your ability, and treating God with the reverence and everything due him. Number two, love your fellow man. Yes, love your fellow man is a direct commandment as considered equally important as loving God, out of Christ's own mouth. Now, if you see a person who is consistently speaking with a tone of hatred towards their fellow man, they are not a Christian. Period. Therefore, I will say with conviction that the Westboro Baptist Church is not a Christian church, even though they call themselves one. Luke says, I think there is a way to distinguish themselves from the Greeks and counter the absorption of Greek culture. I disagree, Luke, and I don't think there's any evidence to support that. You're just saying that because that one regulation might affect a common practice in Greece at the time, but at the same time, Israel wasn't trying to regulate Greece. They were trying to regulate Israel. I think the spelling of dyslexia is mean for dyslexics. I agree. And there goes the chat again. Let's see, Valor says, seeing as anal sex, there's a lot of bacteria that can be deadly. Back then, as medical technology wasn't very good. That's the point. That's why I said, a little less graphically, but that's why I just said that hygiene back then wasn't what it is today. I can counter that if God created the universe and our scientific knowledge helps us understand how he did it. So far, we're pretty sure water doesn't appear out of nowhere. Well, yeah, Luke, but here's the thing. If God exists, all right, and God is omnipotent, and God is able to create from his own living energy, he can create mass and within our universe. And he did so at creating the universe itself at a point that we refer to commonly as the Big Bang. Assuming that God has that kind of ability, are you saying that he would not have the ability to create some extra water so that he could make a flood that he particularly wanted to do? No. And that's why it's a pointless argument. There is a clear definition of what being Scottish is. Being born in Scotland. You aren't Scottish yourself, but of Scottish heritage. Okay, fine. What's that got to do with anything? If you want, if the definition of being Scottish, now maybe I'm mistaken. But if that's the definition of being Scottish, right, is that you're born in Scotland, fine. I'm not Scottish. I have no problem with that. There are indeed Republicans that believe in what you described. The rank and file Republicans tend to ignore them, and the Democrats laugh at them, but they are out there. I'm not saying they're not out there, and that's why there's the log cabin Republicans, right? And there are liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats. They exist. However, and that's the funny thing about blind ideology and what I was talking about before. They think that the political party is so important that even though they disagree with everything that party stands for, they vote for them anyway. And I will give you a wonderful example of that in mass in this country right now, and that is the black community of the United States. Now, I will tell you, since obviously Mrs. Antricker is black, I've gotten to know a lot of her family over the years, and not just her family, but a lot of other people in the black community that I never would have gotten to know. And I will tell you that talking to even a lot of these activists and stuff in the black community, they are almost universally very, very conservative. However, they will always vote Democrat because they were convinced by the Democrats shortly after the Civil Rights was passed that the Republicans didn't want them to have civil rights. That is an outright lie, but that's what they believe. They really believe that the Republicans hate black people. And so the majority of black people in this country vote for Democrat every single year, even though they disagree with almost everything the Democrats say. Luke says, that's where you're thoroughly wrong. Congressmen and women are the lobbyist targets. If this didn't work, there wouldn't be lobbyists. I didn't say it doesn't work, but I'm saying that the congressmen and women are ultimately responsible for what they do. I'm not willing to say it's not their fault just because, oh no, the lobbyists tricked them. Well, if they're so gullible as that the lobbyists could easily trick them into voting for something that was against their interests, then they shouldn't be elected. Do you like the phrase, beam me up Jesus? Not particularly, no. Don't mistake what I say, though. I'm not arguing for full regulations either. I'm just pointing out that laissez-faire capitalism is not a viable solution. Kind of the opposite. Well, I disagree. I think you get rid of regulation on non-vital industry and let the people decide what products or services they want. Not let the government pick and what companies get to succeed and forcing other companies out of existence through regulatory expense. No True Scotsman, where did that phrase come from? I'm not sure where the phrase actually came from originally. Excellent description of what Westboro truly is. No matter how many people will finally understand it? Very few. A lot of people still think, and that's the thing that sickens me about. And I'm not blaming anybody in this chat, just so you know. I'm not talking about you guys, but that's what sickens me about a lot of online atheists. People like Thunderfoot. Thunderfoot genuinely believes that Westboro Baptist Church is the perfect example of Christianity. And that's why I give a big FU to Thunderfoot, because he sees these extreme hate groups as being typical Christians. And then people like me, he sees, oh, no, you're not really a Christian because you don't believe what they do. And he's only doing that to create a straw man that Christianity is all about hate, when Christianity is quite literally the opposite. Luke says, I'm not making this opinion out of thin air. I'm also using the story of Exodus. Egypt was Greek when the ancient Testament was written, and Judea was a province of Egypt. Okay, but you know what? Exodus wasn't over the issue of homosexuality. I mean, you make it sound like there's this huge conspiracy against the Greeks because homosexuality was banned. But, and this is a funny thing about Christians get all worked up about homosexuality as well, is that homosexuality is not mentioned a whole lot in the Bible. Adultery is talked about a lot more than homosexuality. And yet we make this big deal out of homosexuality. Why? Because in the modern world, we want to sit there and scream and cry about how mean the Christians are because they don't believe in same-sex marriage or whatever. But honestly, it's not as big a deal as everybody makes it out to be, and it never was. However, just because it's mentioned in the Bible as being a sin doesn't make it a plot against the Greeks. And I don't understand why you're saying you are making it out of thin air. Even if Egypt was Greek when it's called the Old Testament, not Ancient Testament, by the way, when the Old Testament was written, which, fine. And so Egypt and Judea was a province of Egypt. Even if I accept all that is true, it doesn't matter. Okay, the Israelites were a particular group of people that had a particular set of beliefs, and they were not trying to force Pharaoh to not have sex with another dude. They weren't. And it's a common misconception that somehow when Christians talk about what God's commandments are, that we have to force everybody who's not a Christian to behave in such a way. The Bible says the exact opposite. Darth Aaron says, I don't care what color you are. If you're a good person, I will like you. If you're happy all the time, I will hate you. Well, then you definitely won't hate me. I have a feeling you like the RR streams more than your nerdy stuff. No, the stuff we talk about gets a little more in-depth, honestly. I love the nerdy stuff, but this stuff requires more time, and that's why these streams tend to stretch on a bit, although I am going to be wrapping it up here momentarily. I always wondered, what if there were two gods, as a Christian, one pagan, and wanted to see who wins by the larger following. If that was the case, then the Christian God is winning. Well, actually, let's see. I believe that isn't Hinduism bigger than Christian? I don't know. Let's see. Worldwide. All right, let's take a look. Worldwide religion demographics. Okay, yeah, I guess Christianity is ahead. So Christianity is 31.4% of the world Islam is 23, Hinduism is 15, Buddhist is 7, folk religions 5.9, Jewish 0.2, other 0.8, unaffiliated, which would be atheism, 16.4. Which means that there are more atheists in the world than Hindus, according to this 2010 study. However, if you take into effect that the 31.4% that claim to be Christian, a very, very large percentage of those people are Christians in name only. I always wonder what if there were. Oh, I already read that. But anyway, I don't think the problem is that in my humble opinion, monotheism is the only type of theism that really works, and by definition, monotheism cannot have more than one God. I know a priest as gay as they come, and it makes me sad that he won't ever have a partner and will be alone. Well, first of all, if he's a priest, he's not supposed to be with anybody anyway, although I understand the Catholic Church may be lightening up on that. But here's the thing, and we all sacrifice things we may want to do for things that are better, right? So everybody does that. And so if you truly believe in what that God is real and that the Bible is legit, then and you want to spread that message, then yes, you would give up your instincts to have sex with people of the same gender. It's something that a lot of people struggle with. However, again, you can, I know this is horrible to say this, but you don't have to have sex. You don't. And Peter's making me go back and read comments. I don't do that, Peter. I hate when people do that. So the introduction of the term "no true Scotsman" attributed to British philosopher Anthony Flew, because the term originally appeared in Flew's 1971 book, An Introduction to Western Philosophy. In his 1975 book, Thinking About Thinking, he wrote, what he is in fact saying is no true Scotsman would do such a thing. Gotcha. Well, there you go. Luke says, I'm not talking about a conspiracy. I'm exemplifying how historical context is likely to influence how those wrote the scriptures may have used them politically. Well, using the scriptures politically and writing them with a political bent are two different things. And if you want to suggest that the scriptures were written with a political agenda in mind, well, then that's only something an atheist can say, because obviously a Christian would believe that if it's inspired of God, obviously it's not a let's get the Greeks kind. But and that's why, again, it goes back to, does God exist? Because, of course, you would believe that, because you don't believe that divine inspiration is even possible. Catholics have over 1 billion followers. Yeah? Sadly, the scriptures tell us that narrow is the way and few are those that walk upon it. We will always be the minority. That's true, Aberjam. And in fact, that's why I believe that it's perfectly normal and expected that the majority of people who claim to be Christians are not. I do believe that, because I do think that people underestimate that how narrow the narrow path is. I will repost this from earlier. Sorry I haven't been around this much. My father, whom I hate, is prostate cancer. I still refuse to contact him. Well, you need to contact him, Darth. And you need to let go of your hate. I know that sounds like something out of Star Wars, but it's true. If your father has prostate cancer, and I don't know how bad it is, if he's terminal or anything like that, but I'm just telling you this, Darth, you will feel better if you bury the hatchet with your old man. And so stop hating. I understand that, and I don't know all the details, but I understand he did things to earn your hate. All right, I totally understand that. But you, my friend, can be the bigger man and let go of the hate and make amends. And especially if he's terminal, be with him when he needs you. And I know that's a difficult thing to do. Believe me, I know that. I did not speak to my parents for years and years and years. And then my dad got terminal. And I turned around real quick. My mom and I were never close until she got terminally ill. And so don't miss the opportunity. You will regret it for the rest of your life. You don't think you will. I know you don't think you will, but you will. And Luke says, I was talking about the Hebrews, on their particular incentive to develop the idea of Messiah under occupation, the Jewish Messiah, not the Christian one. Well, keep in mind, the Jewish Messiah and the Christian Messiah are the same thing. It's just a matter of the Jews don't believe that Christ was the Messiah. The Christians believe that he was. but the Christians believed that Christ was the Jewish Messiah. You know, that's the problem. People don't. The Jews just most of the Jews. In fact, the early Christian church was Jewish. It was a Jewish church. It was a Jewish sect. The original idea of Christians. And if you read, it's actually very interesting stuff. If you read in the New Testament post Gospels, that there was a fairly substantial debate between Peter and Paul as to whether or not the Christian message was supposed to go outside of the Jews, whether or not we were to evangelize and spread the word. Fortunately, we are, I do think that the word is meant for everybody. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be a Christian today, because on only the people that are identified as Jews, only a small segment of them would be Christians at all. So anyway, I am going to wrap it up there. Darth, please try to make amends with your dad. I know it's something you don't want to do, but you really should. And I think Aberjam really nailed it there. Unforgiveness is a stone around your own neck. Yes. And Valor, obviously, your ex is still in my prayers, and I hope that things go well there. To the rest of you, thank you for all of the. We had some really interesting stuff here. We're gonna, I will tell you this, and please, and thank you, Peter. I'm not going to keep reading the chat because I'm not going to keep going for an hour and a half here after this. But I do want you guys to know that if we eventually get to a point where I can do YouTube as a full-time job, then yes, I will do multiple Rational Roundtable streams through the week. Because if that becomes, once my healing process is done with the leg and I'm actually able to work a full schedule, then me and Mr. Miles will be able to put out 2 or 3 videos on the Anti-Tricker channel every week. I'll put out 2 or 3 videos on the Rational Roundtable channel just for fun. And obviously I'll still do live streams probably 5-6 days a week on the Anti-Tricker channel, but I'll probably do at least 2 or 3 on this channel so that we can get these conversations going and get deeper into them, because I think they're definitely worth having. And Mrs. Anti-Tricker is waving to everybody. Hey, babe. So I didn't know you were listening in. But thank you all for just being, the best group of people on YouTube. You guys have really touched us in such a wonderful way, and I can't say that enough, because it's just mind-blowing. But I do have a lot of work to do. I'm going to get that review of The Mandalorian done. I know Miles is working on that Borg video. And yes, I will talk about politics during the elections, probably, Darth. But the Borg video, holy crap, is that going to be a good video. I hope that it does as well as the Timelines video does, because Mr. Miles has done an incredible job with the part of it that I've seen so far, but he's still got a ways to go. So Mr. Miles, no screwing around. No screwing around. We got to get it done, because we got to get at least another video or 2 done before Thanksgiving. All right? And I know that you need some time during Thanksgiving, so we got to get a couple of videos done. And Mr. Miles, I will talk about this for just a second before I sign off. Even us evil atheists have touched you. Absolutely. And in fact, I love my atheist friends online. If it was not for my atheist friends online, I would be a horrible, horrible Christian. That is 100% true. Because you guys, and especially atheists like many of you, like Luke, that will ask questions, be persistent, but not be a dick about it. All right. And because when people act like Thunderfoot, it turns me off, the conversation ends. But when people want to have a genuine conversation about this stuff, it makes me stop and have to think about stuff. And I was thinking some things were true that were totally bogus a few years back. And I would be out here on YouTube talking about, oh, yeah, this and this and this. And people would say, well, wait a minute, what about this, this, and that? And I'd be like, oh, crap. And then I'd have to come up with an answer. And people like King Heathen, I don't think he's doing YouTube anymore, and others were very, very crucial in me changing a lot of how I saw the Bible and Scripture and God, and I think in a good way. So, yes, absolutely. The atheists, I think, are to a good, open-minded Christian, will sharpen your faith like nothing else. Mr. Miles says, honest question, what's wrong with the idea that God wants there to be some atheists? What's wrong with the idea? Nothing. Whether or not that's what God ultimately wants, I can't say. I don't speak for God. And that's one thing you will never hear me do. I do not claim to have any kind of special knowledge of what God wants or doesn't want. I know what the Bible says, but I look at the Bible as it is intended, which is not a manual for me to go out there and beat people over the head and tell them how they're horrible people and going to hell. The Bible is about self-regulation. The Bible is about self-enlightenment. I can't use the Bible as a weapon. I use the Bible as a tool for myself. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a good one. And take care. And I will talk to you all tomorrow night, I hope. Assuming that all goes well.